Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Hey, welcome to Schmidt List. I'm your host, Kurt Schmidt. I'm really excited you're here because I've got a good friend of mine joining us today. I do have to mention that the launch of the Solopreneur Society is in full swing, and you can check it out at schmidtconsulting.group. I've got links to everything in the description below. If you're a solo business owner and you're looking for a support team to help you learn how to grow your business, people help you, deal with the waves that happen inside of your business, well, go and check it out. There's a lot of details at the website, link down below. All right. So let's jump in. I don't want to waste any time because every time I talk to Nathan, we have an amazing conversation. So I'm excited to have him join today. All right. Nate, how are you doing today? Hey,
How are
Nathan.
you?
It's good. I'm doing great now that you're here. This is going to be fantastic. All right. So speaking of what you're doing and what's going on, tell me about the work you do and who do you work with?
Yeah, that's a big question for me because I'm both fractional and there's a sort of a mess of things. I'll try to give you the short answer and then we'll unpack the long answer. Short answer is
Mm,
I am the founder of How to Be Second. I'm
yep.
recently the author of the book by the same name. And also, I'm a fractional COO, and I currently work with a mutual friend of ours, Jen Swanson, over at Tuckpoint Advisory Group.
hmm It's great. And tell me about this journey into the second area, right? Because traditionally we see all the books and things talking about be the CEO, be the top dog, be the leader, lean in, all these different things. What was the inspiration for you to focus on that support role and that integrator role versus the visionary role?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I also think we'll have to be careful with questions in my answers, right? I'm a very literal person. That's part of who I am. Right. The easy answer is I've been this way my whole life.
Yeah.
As I'm getting that sort of pressure from the outside, I remember picking up the E Myth for the first time. I assume you've read that book.
Yes.
And there's kind of a little library, right, of those sorts of books that are like, oh, yeah, of course, I've read Never Eat Alone. I've read E Myth and I've read, whatever. I remember reading that for the first time, and as a business owner, I was running my own company and trying to grow that, and I remember reading it and being like, "But I'm this middle one.
Mm.
I'm the manager." It was going through all of the identity characteristics of the typical entrepreneur, and I was like, "Well, I'm in the role, but I'm not any of these things. I don't this isn't the kind of person that I am. I'm willing to do this job. I'm competent to do the job. In fact, I'm more competent, what I'm finding, typically, but I don't have a lot of the identity characteristics that make you successful in this thing." And that sort of set me off. Interestingly, I had been joking around about the idea of writing a book called How to Be Second for a decade by that point, partially because who wants to write that book? But I did. It spoke to me. It spoke to who I was and what I wanted to do. And not just who I was, but also how I found my value. So even as a person who was trying to build my own companies, not having those identity characteristics, I was like, yeah, but the thing that I want to do the most is to support the people who are sort of off their rocker a little bit.
Right.
And we're not saying you have any experience in being that
No, no,
person
it's a
or
very
knowing what
foreign
it is.
side, but I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to learn.
Well, I'll tell you all about them. I know you've never even met one, and you certainly aren't that person. So, but it's that idea, and I sort of like I just oopsed into those roles, as is the journey of many people who
Yeah.
claim this identity. We accidentally find ourselves in these second in command or generalist or force multiplier roles. It's like our whole life is pushing us into that space all the time. And we kind of like it. That's what led me along finding that. I admit finding like EOS and traction sort of in my mid 20s through like
Mm.
sort of a messy thing with a company that I was part of and had helped grow as the general manager. And I remember reading that EOS word integrator for the first time and reading the description. I actually cried on my
Wow.
couch. And to
Found my
me, not
people.
but pretty quickly, I was like, "Well, I've been this my whole life." So it's great that you've found a word for me, but I'm not going to tie myself to your word. I need to own my own value for myself. I started building community there. I've met some wonderful people in and around that community. But at the same time, I was like, this is something that needs to be beyond this one particular thing. Cause just in case this system ever goes away, and as someone who had read the E Myth in the last 5 or 6 years, I was very familiar with the idea of these systems sort of rising and falling.
Yes.
I was like, I need something to anchor to way beyond this thing. And I need to see if there are other people out there like this. That was years and years ago, almost a decade ago now. Since then, we've published the book, How to Be Second. We have hundreds of other people who have been like, I am this thing. I have words and language for myself for the first time in my life. I'm not insane. It's been a crazy, incredible, wow journey. Kind of shocked along the way the entire time.
Well, and to your point, you kind of find out like this is the good spot for me. It's a comfortable spot. It's a place where I feel most successful. I feel safe. And I also feel that I would have the most impact in my
Mhm.
career, right? And and to your point, there's so many wackadoo founders out there. Uh, not that we have one in the news cycle all the time to
No.
just to point at. Um, but the whole thing for me is that if you don't if you don't go down that journey and you're just kind of listening to all the other people around you telling you what success looks like and what success means for other people versus you, I mean, you can really get into I mean, it sounds like that's a difficult place that you were in and you found your way you found your way out of it. Do you think that was just because it was a natural you were just naturally curious about exploring these things, you were really invested in success? What was the driving force? Because I know so many people that just kind of sit and wallow in, this doesn't feel good and I'm kind of stuck, so I guess I should just be happy I have a job sort of attitude, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I think I still live in that every now, like on Tuesdays at 4 o'clock. Like, that's you can still find
Yeah.
Nathan feeling exactly that way. Um, and also like it's all of the above, right? It's a combination of like frustration,
Yeah.
need, um, this glimpse that there was sort of something better over the hill. This deep tug, right?
Yeah.
I compare things often to this idea of saying a lot of people are willing to be where they're at because it's like being at a tiny oasis in a desert. The idea of leaving someplace where it's not a lot of water, it's not a lot of shade, it's not much, but it's safe.
Mhm.
And the idea of someone saying, I don't know exactly where, but if you're willing to leave this and go walk through the desert for a little while, I really do believe you're going to find something even more. And I've always been one of those people who has gone, well, I'm willing to go into the desert for a while and just be lost
Mhm.
for the sake of finding something new. I'm willing to leave the safety of what I have for the sake of finding what I know is out there.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that I share with, again, a lot of fellow seconds. Like we're pretty risk averse people, but at the
Sure.
same time, like
You're
because of the
confident in
way
your
that we
skills.
well, yeah, it is one of our skills for sure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Do you find that that a lot of the other people that you talk to, the people that have read the book, have gone through similar journeys? Is it always kind of the same sort of story?
we, well, I like 80% of the time, our stories are
Yeah.
like shockingly aligned.
Are
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur yourself, don't you, or maybe not, but like
Mhm.
unpack for me, like, cause I feel like you're sort of on the other side of the table from this, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. I'm
like
the wacky visionary guy.
unpack for me, like when you get into a room and the role is different than the identity.
Mhm.
So like not every person who's a CEO is the wacky visionary guy. That's an
Yeah. Sure.
identity thing, not a role thing.
Sure. Sure.
And so, like, when you get around the other wacky visionary people, like, is then that a
Mhm.
little bit like finding your you're like, "Oh, yeah, our stories are shocking," or do you find something totally different?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the backgrounds are usually very different, but the problem solving framework is similar,
Mhm.
which is leap and which is ready, fire, aim kind of,
Yeah, yeah.
like
Your risk
it's
tolerance is, like, super high.
yeah, super high. Yeah. I mean, it's 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 ridiculously high.
Do you feel like some of that has to do with maybe that because on one hand, people would say, like, "You're sort of a wacky visionary type," right? But
Yeah.
I have very rarely met people, including yourself, who have more attention to detail,
Mm,
like, when you are serving something, a product, a
sure.
service, or whatever.
Yeah.
I rarely have come across people who are you're so attentive to exactly how that looks and feels when you serve someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say a lot of it comes from experience because you've lived your whole life and gray hair plays a little bit into it. Is that,
Mhm.
you've presented these wacky ideas that have been kind of half baked before and the feedback has been pretty damning, right? It's been like you haven't thought this through. Like, what about this? What about that? And you're like, oh, you just don't get it? Like,
Yeah,
oh, okay. So you learn if you're gonna if you're committed to that sort of experience in life and that the direction you want to go, you have to learn to be able to explain yourself. You have to be able to learn to put yourself in other people's shoes when they get hit with a new idea or a new product or a new service. What are the questions that they are going to have? And the more you can do that, the more successful those things will be. But it's not to say that you don't just fly off the handle in the middle of a meeting and be like, let's fire all the missiles.
yeah.
Okay, let's just do it and see what happens. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh, I am so familiar with, like,
Yeah. So
c
so it's not to say that those things don't crop up. But I've been fortunate, yeah, that I've had people around me that are like, well, let's take a step back for a second. And I'm like, why? Let's go,
yeah.
go, 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 go.
Well,
Like,
and just out of curiosity, do you feel like it's because when it comes to, like, actually serving the thing, you're so keyed in to what that thing needs to look and feel and smell and
mm,
taste like at
yeah.
the point of sort of, like, service, but then also you're just so clear, and
Hmm.
I wanna make a nuance between clarity and certainty here. You're so
Yeah.
clear on the future that you're
Hmm.
pushing towards by doing this sort of crazy thing or whatever. And maybe sort of like everything in between that might be a little hazy and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's absolutely okay. So I'd say this all the time. Why do people hire me to coach them? Was because I'm from the future. I live in the future. Like, I am in this utopian place most of the time. About 2/3 of the day in my head,
Yeah.
where I see what good looks like. I know what it feels like. I know what it smells like and tastes like.
Yeah.
And but getting there, how to put all the you know how to build the road to get there is kind of more of an afterthought, right? It's more of it'll sort itself out, like, and so, but as a person who's been running as a solo person here for the last 6 months, I have to not only be the architect, but I have to be construction
Mhm.
as well. So
Oh, yes.
it's difficult because that gets in the way of the momentum that you're already feeling, the excitement you're already feeling. And so it can
Mm.
make you start to second guess those bigger ideas and those things. So they work against each other in a lot of cases, which
I
I
want to
know
throw
you're super familiar with.
I am. I want to throw two sort of like research ideas.
Yeah.
So at since publishing the book, the journey of publishing the book was like a 2.5 year, like
Hmm.
3x whoopsie. Because we set out to write the book about how to be really good at the second in command job, like the role, right? And then along the way, I was like, uh-oh, there's an identity here. And then we had another oopsie even past that where we were like, there's two identities here. Uh-oh. So we actually had to rewrite the book twice.
Wow.
Like, yeah, that was a mess. When you have like the anchor of doing hundreds of actual interviews, like genuinely collecting data, because my co-author has a PhD in counseling and psychology. So like he
Mhm.
didn't let us get away with like fly by night.
Right.
And right. So like I consider myself planful, and he was like, no, but I actually know how to do
You're
this.
right, right, right. Yeah, I've done this before.
Right. Oh, you want to gather data and do research? Like I have methodologies for this that we have to abide by.
Right. Literal proven scientific methodologies. Yeah.
Right. So the journey of writing it was way longer than we honestly expected. I was like, I'll sit down and knock it out in like a month. I was
Yeah.
very
I'll just bang it
conservative.
out.
Yeah, why not? It's just my story. 2.5 years later, we publish it.
Mhm. Yep.
But over the course of that, and then the preceding year, we actually published the book 1 year ago this month.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, the book itself is now 1 year old, which
That's
is,
crazy.
I have a lot of feelings about it, most of which are excited.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Some days I feel the whole emotional wheel all at the same time. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
so since then we've gone into a bunch of we've I've still continued to do research around this on the for the sake of the community. Two things I want to throw at you. So that was a big preamble to these two ideas. The first one is competence versus energy.
Mhm.
The second one is back to what we were talking about before, and that is, when do you see? So, something I really want to draw out here is like we were talking
Mm.
about how you're really the attention, the taste, the touch, the smell, and also sort of like that future. You come from the future. I love that phrase. And it is not that you can't see the in between.
Yeah.
You have all the competence to do that, right?
Mhm.
I mean, like, you're doing it right now. We're live. You set it up. We're doing the stuff. So
Yep.
clearly you're
Yep.
competent. My question is that the thing? It's like, but it's not the thing you wake up going, this is the most important thing to do today.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where you feel a sense of urgency is actually 3 years from now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I've had to really train myself to, be more intentional about how I structure my days
Mm,
and how I work through them, right? So, my days, have used to be just kind of at the whim of whatever my email or calendar used to say, right?
yeah.
Whatever was coming in was kind of how I processed things in the moment,
Mhm.
and once I made that change, and this is back when I was at Nerdery,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we went from 50 people to 600 people in like 6 years, right? So it was a huge massive growth. And I remember, I was working incredible hours just trying to keep up with things, and I just kept it just felt like treading water. Like I was not going
Mm,
anywhere. And I immediately, like, I had lots of other people give you advice like you do, right? Like, go read, like, do inbox zero and do blah, 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 and I was like, okay, like, all these things. And I was like, okay, well, and what I learned is that if I took a little piece from column A, a little piece from column B,
mhm.
and I mashed it together into sort of my own framework, that worked out really well for me. So I realized, like, during the mornings, I was very strategic. So
Mm,
any types of visionary type work or planning or vision casting or those sorts of things would happen before lunchtime. And then in the afternoon, all that was turned off, and I was just fingers on keys, and I was just making stuff. Like I was producing things in the afternoon, and that's kind of how I've run things for the last decade or more. And that it sounds simplistic, but that change and that being intentional really changed how sort of I'm able to sort of balance the vision and producing side of things for myself. Now, I'll be honest, like, I do not do as good a job producing as I would like to do. Like, it's not as and I appreciate you saying that, I pay attention to detail, but there's a lot more detail I would pay attention to if I could do if I could do that, uh, but the idea of being able to really, and I talk about this in my book,
Yeah.
where when I'm doing context switching, I also have to, like, physically context switch as
Mhm.
well. So when I'm doing certain types of work, I'm doing it digitally. When I'm doing other types of work, I'm analog. When I'm
Interesting.
doing other types of work, um, I'm doing it more just in my head and stuff, right? So like
Yeah.
I have like 4 notebooks and they're all different shapes and sizes and colors. And so when I'm working on like notes, they go in this notebook. And then in this notebook goes ideas for future things. And then in this notebook goes, all this stuff. Whereas a lot of people try to combine all these things in like you get
Mhm.
Notion, you try to combine all these things into one large system. For me, if I context switch between things, I have to also physically context switch, right? So if I'm processing emails, it's on my laptop. I never do it at this in this area. Like things like that have been really big for me to understand how to actually process the information that I'm dreaming up on a regular basis.
There's so much there. There's so much there. I'm gonna unpack just a couple of those things. The first one is I love what you're saying about context switching,
Yeah.
including all the way down to the physical
Yeah.
reality. I have also found that to be incredibly helpful for me,
Mhm.
for 2 things that I wanna call out there. The first one is, so, like, I move around a lot during the day. I'm mostly a remote worker,
Yeah.
with a couple of, like, anchors, and I sometimes I just need to get to a desk, so I have co-working space here in the cities,
Mhm.
and and I have to show up at different places, whatever. So, I regularly will find myself being like, "Okay, I need to focus on this project right now. I'm gonna do that at home." And when I close the project for the time, I practice time blocking. It's kind of the only way I've
Oh, sure.
been able to. And when I close that project at home, I leave. I go to a coffee shop. I go to a Starbucks or something like that. And something really important about that is that I have to move that physical space, just kind of like what you're saying about it. It's tactical more than just in my brain.
Mhm.
The other thing is that I've learned, much to my chagrin, I cannot finish the last 5 minutes of a project in the new
Oh,
space.
oh,
If I
sure.
do that, I've ruined the space.
Yep.
I don't know if
Yep.
you ever have that where you open up a second notebook and then you start doodling the very last thought that you had, and then you're like, "No."
No, 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 no. Yeah, I'm very much like that. Gotta, you've got to kind of see what's coming and be able to prepare. Because that's the thing is like when I'm about to ship something,
Mhm.
um, it's like I don't know, it's like a checks and balances, and whereas like, and you've seen these documentaries about like the Minutemen, right? The people that lived in silos and would launch the nuclear weapons, right? And it was always they had these 2 keys and you'd have to turn them together at the same time, right? And that having that person alongside me being able to turn the key at the same time. So if I don't have that in my life, I have to manufacture it, you know?
Mm.
I have to manufacture it. I have to create some sort of system around that allows me to have somebody that turns the key at the same time I do to kind of launch that thing. So it could be anything from, uh, I have a great close knit network of people. So I just recently launched the Solopreneur Society, but I'm only
Yep.
launching it to like my inner circle right now, just to get
Mm.
that initial feedback. Whereas I wouldn't go like to LinkedIn and just post it everywhere right out the gate. Like that's not so my network, my close group of people that I trust that will give me honest opinions,
Mhm.
and a diverse opinions too, right? It's not just, other middle-aged white entrepreneur guys, you know what I mean? Like myself, right? It's a diverse group of people in all different ages and catalogs. And so I can get that feedback before I actually like launch, you know. the thing. So again, if I can't have that like as a you know as a full time position or whatever you want to call it with
Sure,
me,
yeah.
I have to create it. I have to manufacture it.
That's funny. So basically you're saying like, look, I'm competent to do the whole range.
Hmm.
And this is also something as seconds, and once again, I'm sort of representing an
Yeah,
entire group, right? It'd be
sure.
like if I were here being like, as tall people, like that, like it's a little bit like that, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's an identity, not just a role, not just a whatever. It's like
I
that's how
agree.
I explain it to my kids. I'm like, well, you know how some people are short and some people are tall? It's like that. Seconds are like that.
Yes, that's right.
And then maybe at some point we'll unpack how seconds are like tomatoes. That's a whole thing in our community, you know? Um, but the that you would have like this, okay, I know I can kind of do everything.
Yeah.
And also, the kind of person that I am is going to always feel urgency in these ways. It's going
Hmm.
to always drive to, I have so much energy for
Hmm.
this type of stuff.
Yep.
And I have the competence to do these other things,
Hmm.
but I almost have to like manufacture, like you said, ways to
Yes.
either live in that space or get those
Hmm.
triggers from that space because
Yeah.
especially when you don't have a lot of energy, you're gonna run
Hmm.
away from those things every time.
Every time. Yep. Yep.
I
And that's
feel
what I find a lot
exactly
of
the
people
same.
that have big ideas that's what happens, is that they just don't fulfill on them because um they don't see how to get they don't see how to build the road. And if they
Mm,
did, they're like, well, I just have no time for it, right? But like
yep.
he was even when I wrote my first networking book, like the first negative feedback I got from somebody was like, well, I can't do this. I have a family. And I was like, well, I do too.
Yeah.
Like I don't like that's a weird it seems like but again in the story that they live, in the story that they tell themselves where they're the main character,
Yes.
um, these types of things these things are not possible because of whatever sort of history they have with the idea of it.
Well, I wanna
Um,
so again, and I this is how I always do this because I like to think of myself as like a researcher, but born in a cornfield. And like I like to
yeah.
do science, but like I'm a hillbilly
Yeah,
actually.
right, right. I'm a scientist with boots on.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. And so this idea of like identity and personality, right? And I tell people all the time, like you can be a tall person and like an extrovert, and you can be a tall person and an introvert. Like those two things are not tied together in any form or fashion, at least not that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so like as we're talking right now, we're talking about these different, or like even this person who got this book, and they were like, "Oh, I can't do this. I have a family." And you're like, "I also have a family." And so my question to you would be like, even if
Mhm.
you are on this journey and you're going, "Well, I am the idea guy," let's say,
Yep.
and you meet another idea guy, how are you finding in along that path, like, that you're going, "Well, yeah, but we can have really different personalities." Like, is that something that's struck out to
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a superpower, to be honest, if you can get over it.
you?
But some people, honestly, but it starts with the first thing is first is that you learn to be a successful visionary. Is you got to get over
Mhm.
yourself. Number one, first of all, like you go back and again, like I hate to invoke, you know, uh, um, Steve Jobs because it's such an easy target. But if you look at him and they asked him, right, like how do you keep an eye on everything? And he's like, I just hire good people. He's like,
Yeah, yeah.
what are you talking about? Like, but again, but he has a standard of the people he hired and whichever. So there's a confidence already there. So he can be allowed to free roam and be like, you know, this is how people will interact with the internet going forward, and
Mhm,
things like that, right? So uh y- you can't it's impossible to do everything by yourself. And if you're running into these personalities, whether it be another visionary and you guys are budding visionary heads, I don't know, whatever, how that
yeah, yeah,
um
yeah. Batman and Batman.
Batman and Batman. Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. If you're running into those in a multiverse and you're running into the same people, then uh, the successful ones are the ones that can merge traffic there. Those are,
Yeah, yeah.
that every time.
I'm super curious how in the course of your because you've been part of so many businesses, you've run so many businesses, now you're doing
Yeah.
your own.
Yeah.
And how often you've run into this idea of like, so you're manufacturing it right now, but also you're a person who believes in coaching. You and I both believe
Hmm.
in coaching, right?
Oh, yeah.
I've said this recently, and that is coaching is not additive, it is multiplicative.
Hmm.
I loved what you said a minute ago where you're like, "No, I'm here from the future."
Yeah.
That's like the idea of being able to have Kurt, who is from 3 years in the future, to, like,
Yes.
give you some guidelines, right?
That's it. Yep. And it's not
Ah,
because, and again, I say this over and over again when I'm talking to people, it's not because I was just naturally good at these things. I made a ton of mistakes. I know the road. I know where the potholes are. Because I know where the potholes are because I fell in them, not because I, not because I was just so smart I could just, with the blindfold on, just navigate. That wasn't it at all. And that's where the value was, because I wish I would have had somebody like myself in my sphere that I could talk to, right? But for
yes.
lots of different reasons, because gatekeeping is a thing, um,
Mm.
because scarcity mindset is a thing, all these other reasons that stop people from coaching and sharing and creating peer networks and all those things, were definitely something that impacted me and something that I refuse to continue to create going forward. So
I love it. I
it's a
love it.
calling for me.
Well, and I, like, I proselytize your, the published works that you have, right? Like, I don't know if you know this, but I actually am, like, a hub group captain for a local recruiting firm.
Yes,
They have all these things, and part of our onboarding, of course, I developed an onboarding system, and
mhm.
just
Of course you did.
independently,
Of
like, they
course you
didn't
did,
have
yeah.
one, but I was like, "Well, you should have one, so I'm
You
gonna
should
build
have
for you."
one, yes, an onboarding system is very important.
Right, so I wrote an onboarding system, because why not? Why wouldn't I do that?
Mhm,
And as part of that onboarding system, I actually put out there that I'm like, "Hey, before you attend your first group with us, you
mhm.
have to buy and read this book," which is the little book of networking, your first book. So, I'm
I
forcing
appreciate that.
people to buy it all the time.
Well, and again, back to the point, like, I had this vision of, like, I knew who the avatar was that needed this book,
Yeah.
but I didn't know how to publish a book. So I went out and I partnered with Wise Inc., which is an agency, and you pay them some money to help you be, they're basically the second, right? They're the
Yep.
integrators for book people. And it was a fantastic experience. And it would have taken me way longer to get the book out if it wasn't for that help. So, there is a lot of people, right? Like, I always always joke around, like, you don't there's a difference between having a coach and having a dad, okay? Um, like, a dad tells you, "Just hold the flashlight for me,"
Yeah.
right? Whereas a coach is like, "Let me know when you're done and I'll check your work." Like,
Yes.
there's a big difference between that, but a lot of people, and again, I'm not trying to talk about patriarchy or whatever, but, there's a big difference between when people are looking for, um, someone to tell them what they should be thinking about. To some
Mhm.
people, because of their life experience, that can come out that could be seen as a negative, where I don't want to be told what to do. I don't so I'm not interested in that.
Right. It's extra funny to me because on some level, I kind of crave that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I live in a
Yeah.
weird position I wanna ask you about the Batman thing, and then I wanna come back
Yeah, yeah,
around
yeah.
on an open question I have on your book. So, look, listen to me, I'm doing the domino line creation, like, as I'm just
It's
talking
great.
in that way.
It's fantastic.
I can't help it. It's, I can't escape it, damn it.
That's
Help me,
right.
Kurt, future,
A tiger can't change the stripes. I'm sorry. Because yep,
right?
yep.
So this idea of like in your experience, even as you were like hiring the book personer, right? And
Yeah.
so they were coming along and they were like sort of executing. They were being that person who could, yes, coach you, but also execute for you.
Mhm.
And you don't always get that combination in your life. How many times do you feel like you've seen, or how often currently, maybe as you are a coach, are you telling people like, look, I really recommend that you find a partner,
Mhm.
get someone alongside you who can do this work with you. And then how often do they go, I'm going to go, I'm Batman because I'm the hero of my own story, right? So I'm
Yeah.
Batman. I'm going to find a Robin, and
Mhm.
Robin is Batman eventually.
Mhm. Right.
And what they really want is like Alfred.
Mm. You know,
And how often do you see them going and finding Robin instead?
yeah, you know what's really funny is that in my experience, they they have a Robin or an Alfred right there, but they've never had an intentional and deliberate conversation about roles and responsibilities.
Mhm.
Back to the identity thing you brought up, right? They've never
Mm,
clearly just sat down and said, you know what? I am this person and you're that person. And we should just execute as those people. Um,
right.
so it's been, and again, like it doesn't have to be somebody who works for you or is hired by you. It could just be somebody in your network that is like has been an account buddy for you for a while or something, right?
Mhm. Accountability.
And but yeah, but you've never had an intentional conversation where you've said like you are my account buddy. When we meet every quarter to have coffee and catch up on things, I need you to ask me about the, you know what I mean? Like nobody, or even if it's somebody they're
Mhm.
working with, there's some things that they just assume because of titles, they just go unsaid that you're this person and you're this person. But
Oh,
people don't
yeah.
sit down and have a human conversation and say, like, this is my identity. My identity is I'm going to jump up, I'm going to be the first person at the whiteboard every time. And I'm going to sketch
Mhm.
out all this stuff. And then I'm going to leave and let other people, I'm going to, I'm just going to float out the air, just float through the door, off to my next meeting, uh, and then I'm going to leave you to sort out all that stuff.
Right.
People just assume that because, well, your title is COO or different things, that that's
Mhm.
just your role and you're just going to do those things. But what I found
Yeah.
is just the human element is missing in a lot of the um conversations where there's a vulnerability, where people are self-aware and they're explaining the way that they act and move. And so it's not always that they don't have that person, which is a thing. I totally get it. It is a
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
But a lot of times there is that thing, but they don't even, it's just not defined, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. I also already wrote down the word accountability. That was pretty great. I don't know, like, I haven't seen that in your stuff before, so I don't know if you came up with that on the spot, but I immediately was like,
No, I've
"Yep,
used it
taking that."
before. But yeah, I mean, but everybody needs account buddies. Because sometimes, again, to your point, you sometimes you don't, you're not in the space for a professional coach or you can't afford a professional coach or whatever. But just having account buddies in your network and deliberately having a conversation of like, I want you to be this person for me. I'm not giving you a job, but it's just,
Yeah.
you know, like I have a good friend, and you've met her too, Jerry Hubricks, and she she's been an account buddy for me, and I've been an account buddy for her for kind of, we're both launching our different coaching. And so she's usually the first person I send stuff to, like when I come up with a landing page or an email, and I'm like, hey, just look at this and let me know what you think. Give me just whatever. And she'll be like, oh, I love it. I just put less detail in it. And I'm like, cool, boom.
Yeah.
And then it goes out to my next layer of
Yeah.
like a couple dozen people in the inner circle of the network, right? People that I know that I have personally helped out a lot. So I don't feel um, intimidated to ask them for help
Yeah.
or feedback. And then it can go out to then my confidence level between those rings is super solid, and then I can go out to the broader group. But again, that's intentional.
Yes. Okay, so I'm gonna I'm coming down to that thing where I mentioned a little bit ago. I wanted to come back to your book,
Yeah.
and I feel like you've set me up really well. You publish a book that basically is like, you need to be doing networking really intentionally.
Mhm.
You call out that we've stupided this word networking,
Yeah.
and that's the Hebrew
No,
definition,
that's
by the
it.
way, of
That yes,
stupidity.
Yiddish, right? Yeah.
And and,
It's like strategery.
um yep, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. So we so you've called this out. You've said, we've done this word. That's not what it means. It can be done really intentionally and really
Mhm.
well. And you lay out a framework for doing that, which I follow some of
Good.
because it was fantastic. And then
Thanks.
I tell people, okay, you also have to do this thing. Now, something in there that I think you allude to, and something
Mhm.
that I think you just alluded to right now with the accountability idea and sort of this like inner circle, wider circle, et cetera,
Mhm.
is that it's a little bit like planting trees.
Mm.
And something that I so this is a question. This is one of those like, I wonder how Kurt's gonna catch this T-ball.
No, no,
That
bring it, bring
is,
it.
as much as I love this idea of networking,
Mhm.
and I work with a lot of people in transition and stuff like that, I tell them all the time, get this book,
Mhm.
meet new people. This won't get you a job today
Right.
because you didn't plant these trees three,
Right.
5, 10 years ago.
Yes,
There's
right, right,
no
right,
fruit
right.
on them yet.
Yep.
And so like how do you navigate that people are going, I'm fresh out of a job. I've been in my career for however long. I don't
Mhm.
know anybody from a stick in the ground. And so now
Yeah.
I'm going to start doing 5 networking meetings a day. And you're like, whoa, 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 you took my, what? How do you handle that?
Yeah. Well, I treat it just like anybody who maybe gets hacked for the first time or has a fire and they don't have a working fire extinguisher and now they're coming and I'm the insurance adjuster,
Oh, yes.
like
I
um
like this metaphor.
they won't ever they'll never not have a working fire extinguisher again, right?
Right.
Uh and so to me, I'll give you an example. I just met with somebody I got introduced to that was looking for a little help with networking. They had been at a company for a very large organization for 15 years. And probably spent 15 minutes of the conversation lamenting how they hadn't focused on networking as any part of um, their thing because
Mhm.
um, it's not their fault. We are taught to get a job. We're not taught to build a career.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's what people look for. People look for jobs. And so I
Mhm.
can't fault them when they show up and they haven't planted those trees because nobody ever taught them to do it, right? Like when I was in my early 20s, like I ran up a ton of credit card debt. And then had to had to figure out how to bail myself out of it. But nobody ever taught me like, any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And the credit card companies certainly were not going to help me
No.
uh, manage my money carefully, right?
Yeah. You were the perfect client.
Oh, I was the perfect client, yeah. So I was like 21, I had like $20,000 in credit card debt or something,
Oh,
and I was
yeah.
like, and I was like, "Oh my god, like my life is over." Um, but I could tell you from then on, like I have a credit card, but I don't carry it. Mm,
Right.
like so there's just things in life where unless it's a cultural part of how you grew up, where it's just gonna be a natural incline for you, and other people, it's just not going to be. Um, you gotta break an arm
Uh-huh.
first, you know?
Let me ask you this. I'm gonna try to tie way too many Venn diagram sort of like things
No,
all
bring it.
overlapping at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and that is this idea of like, okay, networking, which takes time, coaching, that's a multiplier of anything you're doing, right? It's multiplicative of the stuff that you're
Yep,
doing.
yep.
this idea that we are potentially have base identities like being tall or being short, even if our
Mhm,
personalities can look very different, right?
mhm.
Um, Tomato is a tomato and it's not a lemon. And also, a tomato comes in many different colors.
Sure does.
That's right. And if you're a second, then you're a tomato, a
Mhm,
second. And so this idea, networking is over time. How would you
mhm.
recommend someone who's going and I
Yeah.
sorry, let me caveat this. I want to know what you have done, not just
Mhm.
what you would do. I'm open to what you would
Sure.
do. I'm open to you making something up, but only if you don't have
Mhm.
lived experience.
Yeah.
And so, my question is, how do you go about networking with intention
Mhm,
while recognizing you need stuff that you're not naturally attracted to? You need an
mhm,
account buddy that needs to look
mhm.
different than you. You
Yeah.
don't need a Robin, you need an Alfred. And you
Right,
need to
right.
do this stuff a long time ago. So
Mhm.
how do you plant this tree now? All of those things together.
Yeah, for me, the idea has always been about, first of all, understanding where do you wanna be? Like, and that's one of the challenges that I find so many people is what are your career goals, right? And, for probably 80% of the people I talk to, it's make more money and have more responsibility, power slash security, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the way that I then respond is that the only way to guarantee that is by building your foundation, with people and with a network. So if you want those things, we've got to start here. And it doesn't matter if you're 65 or you're 25. You
Mhm.
can still, it's the same way the stock market, right? It doesn't matter when you invest, it's just a matter that you actually invest and you will get a return on your money. But the people that I talk to, again, the story, it's the cultural background is the stories they tell themselves of like, well, I don't have the time for all of this. And I'm like, you can manage 2 half-hour meetings a month.
Right.
That's all. Start there, you know? Like, it doesn't have to be insane. Just start there. Right. And then I have people that say, well, people are, I run into folks that are very transactional and they just want something from me. Yep. You're going to run into dicks in your life. I don't. So do you not leave the house? I don't,
Right.
you know, somebody might bump into your car at the grocery store. Does that mean you don't get groceries? No, you to go out, as they say in Days of Thunder, rubbing is racing. It's very important movie quote that I love to, you
That's
know,
right. That's right. I'm
because if
pretty
you're not
sure,
out there, if you're not
yeah.
out there, um, uh, allowing yourself to be vulnerable and meeting with folks and learning things, you're just too risk adverse. And so, what's going to happen um, is that those opportunities will just pass you by. They will just
Mm.
fly right past you, because you're not going to be prepared enough in the bubble that you're in to experience when something comes from the outside and pierces that bubble. You've
Hmm.
got to be ready for it. You've got to, and I'm not saying you just wait there like you think the sword of Damocles is hanging there, ready to drop on you at any point. Like, you know,
Yeah.
but you've got to be, you insurance is a thing. People have insurance. A network is insurance.
Mm. I like this a lot. I also like your allusion to um, like, being the claims adjuster person where you show up and you're like,
Yeah.
"Look, I'm sorry, the fire extinguisher" like, you didn't have one, and now there
Right.
is a fire, and you
Yeah.
can't put out the fire now.
Right. Yeah. Right. You can't put out the fire now. Like you just, it's done. We need to move on. And how are we going to move on from this? How are we going to grow and learn from these, um, sometimes terrible, but sometimes happy accidents?
Yep. Okay. Well, I think that was a great answer. I don't know if
I
anyone
appreciate
else caught that, but I felt like it was a great answer.
that. Well, and for you, I mean, how was, I mean, has your networking journey been similar? Did you kind of early on? You're younger than me, but did you take it for granted sort of early on and then realize, um, what was the turning point for you, Nathan?
That's something I've really struggled with. So the turning point for me was recognizing about my 7th burnt bridge. And like I
Let the bridges I burn light the way to my success. That's
that's and I don't even think I was that clever about it. I I probably needed a few more book quotes in my life at that point. No, I think realistically, I again, like this comes back to my identity and the personality and whatever. I have a little bit of an abrasive personality, frankly, all told. And on some level, it plays to being a strength of mine. But
mm,
also it means that I've had to sand off a rough edge. I wouldn't even call it sand off a rough edge, maybe more like grind.
like
Like
like chip it off with like a sledgehammer.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly right. And
yeah,
I will say having kids did that for me at speed.
oh sure.
Um, and also I like running into having that natural sort of personality on top of my identity as a second. And so I kept ending up in sort of these second in command roles, which gave me, frankly, a lot of authority and power.
Hmm.
And I got there because I was extraordinarily competent and I stayed in my lane really well, even if I didn't have any language for that.
Hmm.
But then I would get very angry when things
Hmm.
weren't going according to my plan.
Right, right.
And I did not have the grace or the wherewithal to say, "Hey, a little fire has cropped up. I'm gonna grab the fire extinguisher. I'm gonna put it out. We're gonna," like maybe we're not a good fit. Maybe we're not a good identity or personality match or whatever. I didn't have any of that. Right.
Right. You have any of those
Um,
tools.
yeah. So we in the second community, we call this getting a divorce. Like
Hmm.
it was at that level multiple times where
I see.
I left a a relationship which with a person who was effectively the first in command that I was working with. I mean, all the way down to like my dad at the time. And so
Mm-hmm.
this has been a repeated pattern for me. And I
Sure.
think at some point in my early 20s, I went, I think it's me, you guys. I was like, "Hi, it's me.
Ah,
I'm the problem. It's me."
yeah. It's the person who's never had a great roommate, right? Like,
Right, exactly.
yeah, yeah. All my
Yeah.
roommates have been terrible. Well, is it really? Uh,
Yeah.
eh,
Right. Every single one of my girlfriends is
mm.
crazy. Like,
Yeah,
no,
they're all
boring.
crazy, crazy, crazy.
Yeah, they're all crazy.
Hmm. Yeah,
There's only one consistent, right?
there
And
is.
and I shouldn't even make that joke because I have such a fantastic wife that I don't want to give the illusion even that
Yeah,
she
yeah,
is in
yeah.
any way other awesome. And also this idea of like I was the problem. And so eventually I was in transition once again because I burned the bridges down. And now I have had a few good occasions to do so, I will say. But it's not like I did it even then. It's not like I did it well, professionally, appropriately. And realized at one point, working with a coach of mine, a sort of an account buddy, but who was older than me. His name is Fred McNulty, is Fred McNulty. And he just so much wisdom he was willing to pour into what was frankly a stupid kid that
Mhm.
kept burning bridges behind him. And he just kept being like, look, man, if you keep doing, you're not,
Yeah,
this is
you're gonna
how
flame
this
out.
works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that I was ready finally to hear that. And once I was ready to hear it, I went, I need to plant trees and let them grow. Like, and so
Right,
I started being
right.
really intentional, even running into lots of people who were takers rather than givers and whatever
Yeah,
kind of language you want to use. It didn't
yeah.
matter. I said, from now on, I will make space to
Mhm.
meet people who are both like me and intentionally not like
Right.
me
Yep.
from now on, and I will never give it up. I'll never be
Mhm.
caught without a fire extinguisher again, just like what you said
Yes.
earlier.
It's great.
And
It's
I've
great.
kept that since then. But for me, And I think this might be true for a lot of seconds. It took me a lot of devastating divorces
Sure.
before I got to that
A lot
moment.
of fires, a lot of burned down houses. Um,
So many, so many.
it's not uncommon, honestly, because there is a part of us that it's again back to the main character thing, right? Is that we're the main character in the story. Um, so it is easy to victimize ourselves and say these things are happening to us versus we're causing some of those things. And I think it's very mature to think, well, let me test that theory. Let me let me get in front of situations or people that are not necessarily just like me and then again people who are just like me and kind of test the difference and see where my personal growth is really coming from. Is it coming from if I'm constantly trying to seek out and surround myself with people that are like me, or is that growth coming from a mix of that, right?
Mhm.
Because I do think it has to be a balance. um, I was just having a conversation early today about how anytime something makes me nervous, I lean into it, right? So, for
Mm.
example, like I've always been kind of nervous about guns, right? Like I've shot
Mm.
rifles like when I was a kid or whatever, but um just I don't know, it just struck me and I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go take a class. And I took a gun safety class, went to the range, shot a bunch of pistols. It was a lot of fun and I felt more comfortable about guns in general. Now, am I going to own one or any of those things? No. Like, but that's not the point,
Right.
you know. The point is that is that when something makes me afraid or makes me nervous, I've learned so much more value in leaning into that,
Mhm.
in finding more ways to understand that fear. Because sometimes the fear is valid, like, like don't jump into a cage
Yeah.
with a polar bear, right? Like you don't need to test that one,
Right.
like there's plenty of videos out there about people who've done stuff like that, and
Right.
you're like,
Yeah, yeah,
"Yeah,
yeah.
I see what's gonna happen there."
Yeah,
Right?
don't
But
get
these
close to the
stories we
bison in
tell
the park.
ourselves where there isn't
Yeah.
any empirical evidence to create a fact around it, if we're not testing those things, then we are just a victim, um, of the state we leave ourselves in. And again, some people are fine with that. I know lots of people. I have lots of friends that work for the weekend. They put in their 40 and they head to the cabin for the weekend because that's why they work their 40. Whereas other
Right.
people are much more defined. Their identity is wrapped up a lot in the work that they do.
Mhm.
And those are the people that um, I'm most attracted to. I get along with the best because we get each other. But to say that I don't spend time with those other folks and learn the value of keeping a separation between, doing business and then actually like building relationships. So,
Yeah, well said. Well
yeah,
said.
thanks. All right, we got to cut this off. Been
Oh,
going
yeah.
for a while. So, I love the book. How do I find the book? How do I find more info on Nathan? Where do I go to get all the things so I've listened to this and I'm like, that second, I might be a second. Where do I go and find out more?
Yeah. Thanks so much for asking, Kurt. Let me plug a few of our links. That's a you can go to howtobesecond.com. That's the website, and you can find a bunch of stuff. So, of course, you can get the book, which we encourage everyone to do. It really unpacks like the journey of being this thing and also like finding oneself as this thing, including myself. Because I am this thing, and I
Yeah.
also had a journey of finding myself as this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, getting to decide for yourself whether you are or not. So, howtobesecond.com, that's our website. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Nathan S. Young. Uh, I'm the guy where it says how to be second on the little like tagline.
Well, yep. Yep.
I, this is what I do and talk about.
Yeah.
You can also find the book like almost anywhere. You don't just have to go to our website. We're in every major publisher. We didn't stick to only Amazon. We said no, this needs to be accessible to everybody, and we have the audiobook also. If you find me on LinkedIn, I post almost every single day, incessantly. I drive people insane talking about
No, I think it's
seconds
great.
and that's important for seconds and things like that. And if you are someone who is going, hey, I have been looking for this thing and I've been like Kurt, I've been manufacturing this idea for a long time, or I'm a Batman and got a Batman and I meant to get an Alfred and shit. Um,
Yes.
then we also shortly are, I think next week, we're releasing matchmaking into the world, which is something that we're doing on
Ooh.
behalf of our community. So really intentionally focused on the relationship.
Hmm.
So not search, not recruiting. It is matchmaking. We have a few beta test clients that we've already worked through for this. One person is on a connection meeting right now, a second and a first in command, like literally right now, like it's Friday and they're having that meeting right now, which is very exciting. And
Hmm.
so anyway, we're releasing that into the community. So if you're on either side, like I am this thing, I want to develop, I am a first in command or someone who needs to get a second in my life or I want to learn more about them,
Hmm.
come to our website, got all the stuff, or find me on LinkedIn. That was a very long overture
No, it's
regarding
great.
all that.
It's fantastic. Thanks so much for joining me, Nathan. Always enjoy our conversations. I always learn a lot, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Whenever you want to put me on the calendar, I will show up.
Perfect. I love it. All right. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for taking the time to join me and Nathan for this. It was just a super fun conversation. The other thing I would mention is go to their website. They also do a great newsletter. So if you're not ready to buy the book, Nathan and his team share a lot in their newsletter, and I'm subscribed to it. I think it's fantastic. So make sure you go and check it out. And lastly, a new book is available on Amazon. Speaking of books, you can go and get 10 it's out there right now. I've been really humbled by the response to it. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your week to join me. So we'll see you next time.